Hi, today we're going to talk about reaction versus response and how it is that we can respond better to life rather than overreacting. So let's take a look. Probably the biggest delineating factor between civilization and the animal kingdom is the ability to respond rather than react. And if we look at human beings, those human beings who are capable of responding basically to do a lot better, okay? If we think of normal life, many people are living from paycheck to paycheck, moment to moment, uh, and they're just reacting all the time. Whereas people who are more successful tend to respond more and have a longer term viewpoint. But how do we get there? If you're, say, for example, you're struggling a bit, you tend to overreact, you get too emotional, you think too rashly, perhaps you have anger management issues. Well, how are you going to get to this responding? Because it's easy for me to talk about it, but then how are you going to do it? The reason why we react in the first place, that human beings have been on the planet for a couple of million years, and what kept us alive was the fight flight response, which is basically I'm either running away from the wild tiger or I'm running after the wild tiger. I'm either running away from the other tribal who's attacking me, or I'm chasing after the tribal. So it's called fight or flight, and basically your brain is still arranged in that way. So if we actually look at the structure of the brain, sometimes referred to as tree brains. Let's just take a look at that structure in a diagram. So what we have here with the tree brains is the limbic system, which is like the brain stem, and it's basically the first thing to develop, and this very much goes back to ancient uh, times. And it's like things like monitoring the heart rate, keeping the body alive. Okay. Then we have the limbic system. Okay. And the limbic system is basically called the reptilian brain. And it tends to be a place of emotions of fight or flight. And then we have the neocortex, which is the big lumpy bit on top. And the neocortex is high level thinking. So it all has its place. Okay. Now, the limbic brain has various structures in it. So let's take a look at the structures in the limbic brain. Now there's many different structures in the limbic system. Uh, we have here a whole bunch of them, such as the amygdala, the cingulates gyrus, the fornix, the hippocampus, the hypothalamus, the olfactory cortex, the thalamus. But the ones that we're more interested in are really the thalamus and the hippocampus. Okay, so when you get stimulation, when you get a sensory input, it goes through the thalamus, and the thalamus will more than likely send it through the neocortex. The neocortex is then connected with the hippocampus, which is memories are stored there, and between the higher level thinking and the memory, we will respond to a situation. However, if the situation it looks risky, like a fight or flight situation, the input from the thalamus will not go to the neocortex, will not go to the hippocampus. It will go directly into the amygdala itself, and the amygdala will shoot it into an emotional response. An example of this would be driving down the road and somebody pulls in front of you. You don't have time to think about what's the right thing to do, what's the wrong thing to do, what's the philosophical ramifications of someone pulling in front of me. If I get hit by the car, what will it mean? You have time for this. You simply have to react. You have to fight or flight. So it's a logical bypass button we have in our brain in this limbic system. Uh, it makes sense. But the problem with the limbic system is that it can get hijacked. And what I mean by hijacked is there's various things which can make us bypass this neocortex. And one of the things you might have heard of is amygdala hijacking. So what is amygdala hijacking? Amygdala hijacking is whereby through repeated stimulation, the brain keeps into that emotional side. The stimulation doesn't go to the neocortex and recall memories resulting in a response. It goes straight to the amygdala and it gets this fight or flight, fight or flight, fight or flight. And what happens with fight or flight is you release stress hormones, you release adrenaline, which gets you ready for fighting, and also get your body ready for stress. You get cortisol, which helps you get ready for stress. But if you know anything about sports science, for example, these days they say don't do too much exercise, release too much cortisol. What's the problem of releasing too much cortisol? The problem of releasing too much cortisol is that it wastes away muscle, it makes the body hold on to fat, it makes the body become very inefficient, okay? And so if you've got high cortisol levels, you're going to kind of weaken your body. So why does your body release cortisol in the first place? Cortisol is a very good stress hormone for dealing with things like shock and recuperation. And it takes things away from the area of like building muscle, instead focus on helping the organ survive. It's designed to help you in a real crisis. You know, the ones I talked about earlier with the tiger chasing you or the other tribal chasing you or something. That's what it's designed for, okay? The adrenaline rush. Adrenaline has its uses, but if you're getting adrenaline pumped into your body all the time, over and over and over again, you got a thing called adrenaline fatigue. And adrenaline fatigue, just think of, if you don't have it and you're wondering what it's like, drink 20 cups of coffee for a week and see how you feel. It's this overstimulation. You start getting the black lines and bags under your eyes. And you feel just wired and tired all the time. Okay, so adrenaline and cortisol in small amounts are wonderful, useful hormones for dealing with crisis, but they're not meant to be there all the time. And the problem we get with this amygdala hijacking is our brain does not know the difference between reality and fantasy. You see, our brain was wired to deal with crisis and get on with things. In the old days, that's the way it was. But these days, a crisis for us could be things like planning your future, dealing with an examination that's a year away, dealing with the next promotion, dealing with, am I going to migrate or not migrate? What's my career going to be like? What's my long-term planning for my pension? And so we have so many stressors and so many things which are on the long term, but our mind deals with them as if they're in the now, okay? And this is a big problem we have with reacting. So our mind keeps going into reacting zone. And one of the things that's very, very important here is that often we don't realize. So we have this word used a lot in the area of like social context, that you're triggering me, and it's something that's put out there in the socially correct crowd. But we are actually being triggered physiologically to be either in a fight or flight state a lot of the time. And the problem with this is that often we don't know, because if we're not reflecting on our life, we don't realize we're being triggered. So I want to clarify, this physiological triggering is different from maybe this, psychological state where a person feels upset and they feel, oh, you're triggering me. No. This is a physiological trigger, and there's a good chance you don't even know you're doing it. But you have to become aware of it. Why do you have to become aware of it? Because you can't stop it unless you become aware of it. And the effects of this is it keeps pushing us into the reaction zone and into a very emotional zone. And often we're not that aware, we're not that aware of what we're really thinking. We're not that aware of what we're really feeling. And often we are being traumatized and we don't realize we're being traumatized. And again, I want to clarify, it's a little bit different than what we see in our social media, social interactions online and all that stuff. This thing will be, you're triggering me. People getting post-traumatic stress syndromes over anything and everything. A lot of this is what we call in the old days malarkey, all nonsense, okay? But there is a real side of being triggered physiologically, and there is a real side of being traumatized. It's my experience that human beings are pretty well traumatized a lot of the time. And it's one of the reasons why if you go on a holiday and lie on a beach for a few days, see how de-traumatized you feel. Why do so many people like going on a holiday is because it gives themselves a chance to relax and unwind, okay? So what are we going to do about it? Well, the key thing that we have to do is to take charge here, is to start becoming aware of when we're being triggered, you see? So you do know, obviously intellectually, that if you could respond better to life rather than reacting and living like you're living in some kind of big reality TV drama show, surely your life would be better. You know that. I don't have to tell you that. But how to get there? Well, the basic thing, and I've said this many times in this channel, is things like diary writing, becoming aware. Probably the easiest way uh, to become aware of when you're reacting, okay, is to make a diary entry every evening before you go to bed. Make an effort, try this for 3 or 4 weeks and see how you get on. Before you go to bed, for 5 minutes before going to bed, just think about what happened during the day and think about all the different events. And then I want you to go into the emotions of those events. How do they feel for you? And you will be looking to see if you found moments when you're being triggered, moments when you're being a little bit upset. Or maybe a very easy way to know if you're being upset, because believe it or not, a lot of people don't know they're upset. They're not that in tune with their feelings. But if you keep thinking about something, you're upset. Or you're excited about something, of course, it can be very fun. Let's say you keep thinking about something or someone or some situation, and when you think about it, it's not a happy thinking, okay? That means you're a little bit upset. That means you're a little bit stressed. That means you're a little bit traumatized, okay? So try and become aware of these situations. And initially, you'll probably find that the only way you can really be aware of when you're being traumatized and when you're being pushed into this, amygdala hijacking, amygdala zone. And one of the interesting things with the amygdala hijacking is that the body is, apart from the stress hormones, blood supply reduces the neocortex, and you go back to this more base thinking. Why you see people in confrontation situations of fighting, they become kind of brain dead. We see it in road rage. People stop thinking rationally. Okay, this is all the going down to a lower level of consciousness. So initially, you might find it in the evening when you do your little recall. This is a great exercise. This recall. It's great for your memory as well, by the way. If you really want to boost your memory, do it backwards. That'll really get you going. And it's a great way of gaining perspectives, because I used to have a T-shirt, a Homer Simpson T-shirt, and on it said, "Without TV, it's hard to know where one day begins, another day ends." Of course, it's kind of jokey thing, but it's also the truth that we don't know what happened yesterday or the day before. Everything is a big mush. And this exercise at night before going to bed, just looking back at your day, taking stock, it's a great way of growing and developing as a human being. And you start becoming aware of when you're triggered. And then after a while, you become aware as you're being triggered, or just, I was being triggered just a minute ago, I've already reacted. And then if you keep doing it after a while, you get to a stage where I'm about to be triggered. And that's where the power comes. That might take a few weeks, might take a few months. But when you can realize I'm about to be triggered, you can kind of stand back and say, hey, I'm not joining into this whole triggered thing. I'm going to not be triggered. I'm going to take a deep breath. I'm not going to have this argument with this person. I'm going to do something else. So that in itself is the first level of response, is realizing you're going into the reaction zone, realizing you're being triggered and stopping it from going full blown. And that is a fantastically empowering thing to do, okay? So it's that simple as a way of getting your dealing with this thing, all right? The big challenge we have as human beings, we are set up for fight or flight. And our society is complex, and our society is really set up for responding to situations. So that's the simplest way of dealing with, overreacting. And the other thing regarding responding in life in general is doing things like diary writing. Another thing I like to talk about is writing your life story or speaking your life story. If you, and not for the newspapers or your diary or something. I remember watching some podcasts before. He said the worst way of selling a book on Amazon is to write your memoirs, because nobody will buy it. So unless you're famous, nobody's interested in your memoirs. But you should be interested in your story because it's your story. It's not my story. It's not somebody else's story. It's your story. So just writing in a diary every day for a bit. You don't have to do it all the time, but do it for a bit and try and gain some perspectives on what you really think, what you really feel. And then as you work through it, maybe you go to some group therapy or self-help groups or something, or read some books or whatever, go for walks, have some chats with some nice people. You gain some perspective. You start seeing what are my issues and what am I going to do about my issues and so on and so forth. And that way you start gaining more perspectives in life, and that starts empowering you. Another thing is just learning about life and learning about what you're interested in and what you want to do. And the more you learn about yourself, the more you can work out what you want to do rather than always reacting. So the short-term pictures, we have to get off the amygdala hijacking, reacting to every situation. And the long-term thing is to learn about ourselves and start choosing what we want to do with our life and work towards a life where there's some congruency between what we believe, what we think, what we feel, what we aspire for. And when everything aligns in a state of congruency, your life will start moving in a certain direction. And direction will be the one that you're meant to move in. Because I'm a strong believer in destiny and that we have a path already, like a template from birth. And we don't have to do something different. We just have to find ourselves and be ourselves. Okay. So just remember that. Start observing and start stepping off the overreaction train, and that will give you a lot of empowerment in your life. So many more videos on the site that go into more detail, the different aspects of this. I do repeat it sometimes. I feel it's terribly important. We really got to nail this one down if we want to be responsive, if we want to be happy in life. So please like and subscribe if you like it, and I'll talk to you next time.